Frederick Wiseman spent more than 5 decades filming inside institutions. Now he's the focus of a career retrospective at New York's Film at Lincoln Center. I'm Tom Powers, and this is Pure Nonfiction. If you're in New York City between now and March 5th, take the opportunity to see Fred Wiseman's work on the big screen. The films are also available through many libraries via Canopy. Wiseman was last on our podcast 8 years ago, on episode 55. At that time, we discussed his breakthrough work in the 1960s and 70s in films such as Titty-Cut Follies, High School, and Hospital, as well as his 2017 film Ex Libris on the New York Public Library. He spent the last several years supervising new digital masters of over 30 of his films. We discuss that process and other topics. He describes his long history with PBS, where all his films have shown, with the exception of Crazy Horse, about the risque Paris burlesque theater. Wiseman is now 95 years old. I reached him by Zoom at his home in Boston. I asked, when did he get the idea to devote his filmmaking to institutions?
When I was making Titty-Cut Follies, because it occurred to me that what I could do at a prison for a criminally insane, I could do at other institutions. And that institutions were, in a sense, unexplored territory.
And were there questions that you were trying to answer? And did those questions change over time?
No. I mean, I was basically looking for good subjects. And I was looking for situations where I could see different forms of human behavior. And it seemed to me that, institutions provided a good framework for that.
So a year or so ago, you supervised the transfers of many of your films. Can you describe what that experience was like? I mean, just starting from the basics of it?
Yeah, well, I shot a lot of films on film. 32 of my films were shot on film. Those films couldn't be shown in theaters anymore because the theaters didn't have 16 millimeter projectors. Everybody had converted to digital. So I was fortunate enough to get a grant that allowed me to digitalize those 32 films. And it took a long time to do it because COVID intervened. But now I have copies of all my films digitalized because starting with Crazy Horse, all the films were shot numerically.
And so there are already DCPs existing of the last 12 years or so, but these previous years need to be updated. So describe what that meant, because I believe that you supervised the digital transfer of each one of these 32 films.
Right. I worked with Jane Tomalchev, first at Duart and then at a lab called Goldcrest. Duart went out of business. And Jane is a very good color grader, and we worked together very well. And over a long period of time, it was done over a period of at least 7 or 8 years, because there was a big delay because of COVID. And each film took a minimum of 4 or 5 days. I mean, and Jane and I working together, and before I got there, Jane cleaned up the 4K master.
And so how does it differ between a film that was shot in black and white versus a film that was shot in color?
Well, I mean, the process is exactly the same, except you're dealing with different kinds of decision making. You're dealing with how you like the black and white to look, whether the black should be strong or whether it should be closer to gray. Whereas in color grading, you're obviously looking at the intensity of the color you want for the particular shot. I mean, it's done on a shot-by-shot basis. And one of the major differences between doing it digitally and doing it the old-fashioned way, where you just assign a color value to each shot, you can, if I want to make the sky a little bit bluer, I can do that. Or if I want to bring out the red color in a sweater, I can do it. You can mark off the section of the frame that you want to work on and enhance the color. I mean, you can even change the color, but I didn't do that.
That kind of reminds me that you, over the course of your career, you did go through this shift of making several films in black and white, and then changing over to color. What did that shift mean for you? Was that something you looked forward to? Do you feel like an artistic difference between what you were shooting in black and white versus color?
Well, I like black and white a lot, but then I came to do the films on the School for Deaf and Blind and the film about Neiman Marcus, and color was absent from the life of the blind children, and so that I thought color became important in showing what the real world looked like, which children who were totally blind couldn't see. So those films were shot in color. And then in Neiman Marcus, I wanted to show the color of the goods that were on sale. And that also was an important part of the story. And then a technical aspect that was relevant to the decision to switch is that there have been more advances in color negative than in black and white, so that you could shoot in low light conditions much more successfully with color than in black and white. And since it's rare that I use any lighting, I switched over to color. And the only film since then that I've done in black and white was Near Death. And I did Near Death in black and white because that seemed to be appropriate to the subject matter.
So as you were going back and rewatching 32 films over these several years, what was that experience like?
Well, I mean, it was a trip down memory lane because it brought back the adventure and the particular episodes that constituted the adventure of shooting the film that I was working on. And also, sometimes I saw mistakes or thought that I would do it differently now, but I didn't change anything. So it mainly brought back very pleasant memories of the shoot and the editing.
I mean, can you give an example of anything that you looked at and thought, oh, I would do that differently now because of the way of things you've learned over time or how your approach has changed?
Well, I mean, in Canal Zone, for example, I had a shot of a train going along the side of the canal, which I didn't use. And it would have been a good cutaway, and it would have illustrated another form of transportation. And I don't know why I didn't use it at the time. And Canal Zone, there was a cockfight, and I didn't shoot it because at the time it didn't seem to have anything to do with the operation of the canal. But I regret it because it was very exciting.
I'm glad you brought up Canal Zone because as I was looking over the all the films that Lincoln Center is playing, it stood out to me this cluster of films you made in the late 1970s, Canal Zone, and then Sinai Field Mission, which is about diplomats and technicians working to de-escalate tension between Egypt and Israel, and then Maneuver about NATO war games in Europe. Each of those films is concerned with the way, or is looking at the way America projects its power in other parts of the world. And it's striking that, all three of those films feel just as relevant today in the way the U.S. is engaged in those same parts of the world. I wonder, what you were thinking about in the way American power operates around the rest of the world, making those films.
That's certainly one of the themes, but I think at the time I was just more taken with the fact that I thought they were good subjects. I mean, in part because they were illustrations of how America projects its power, but also they were. I thought that each of them would be a good subject for a documentary.
And I mean, when you look back on those films, and think about the way history has moved forward or stayed in the same place, in the last 40 or 50 years. I wonder how you reflect on that.
Well, I mean, I'm not sure that I do reflect on it because I'm not very good at historical trends or generalizations. I'm much more oriented towards specific issues that are involved in making each film, and I resist making generalizations between historical periods or between subject matters or how places may or may not have changed. I mean, mainly because I don't know, and I've never been very good at generalizations.
I hear that in the conversations that we've had over the years, and I don't mean in asking these questions to push you into a place where your mind doesn't go. I can't help but thinking when someone else sits down and watches these nearly 50 films, if someone were to undertake that at the Lincoln Center, they would might take away observations about the way different aspects of institutions have changed over time. I mean, during that time, we've seen social changes take place. We've seen technological changes take place, and I wonder, in all the study that you've made of institutions, if you feel like you've witnessed meaningful changes, or if you feel like institutions are kind of the same as they were in 1967.
Well, I mean, I'm not being evasive, Tom, but I really don't know. I mean, for example, I haven't been back to the Canal Zone. I haven't been on a maneuver in West Germany since I made the movie. I don't even know if the Sinai Field Mission still exists. But it's equally true some of the other subjects. I mean, I haven't been back to Northeast High where I made high school, so I'm not in a position to make any statement as to whether things are the same or not. And there are people that know a lot more about high school education than I do, and they may be in a position to make generalizations, or they're better at bullshit than I am.
Uh, you know, one of the things that's been unique about your career is that you control all your films. If Lincoln Center were to be staging a retrospective of nearly any other filmmaker, they would be needing to chase down multiple different rights holders, including companies that have gone out of business. But to stage a retrospective of your work, all they have to do is go to you and your company, Zipporah Films, and you can supply them all. Um, I and it's meaningful for me to think about this because um, I think in the film world, in the documentary film world right now, there's a state of confusion or crisis over uh, people feeling a lack of control over their work, a lack of control over how the films reach an audience. And part of that state of confusion is because we now live in a world where a platform like Netflix can reach an audience of millions, and some filmmakers have had a taste of that, and now that it's being closed off to them because Netflix and other streamers are just are not acquiring documentaries the way they once did. The alternative approach to self distribution of sending films to classrooms or small art house theaters feels, I don't know, perhaps like a step down for some who had once dreamed of this audience of a global audience of millions. So, I mean, I wanted to ask you about the feelings you've had over the years of controlling your work and how you reach audiences, and the satisfaction you take in your ability to reach audiences, even if it might be a kind of smaller, kind of homegrown, grassroots approach than what other technology offers.
Well, uh, I got screwed so badly by the distributor of my first two films, Tittycut Follies in high school, that I set up my own distribution company. And this was 1970. And since 1982, which is 43, 44 years, Karen Konachek has run the distribution company for me and also has worked on setting up the productions very ably. And in many ways, it was the smartest thing I ever done because I kept control over the films. And I did it, as I say, because Grove Press screwed me in the first two films, and I felt that I didn't want to go with another distributor because it was likely the same thing would happen. And my films, I've never been involved in a fantasy of my films reaching millions of people. I hope they're seen by a lot of people, but all of my films, with the exception of Crazy Horse, have been shown on public television. So, I mean, whatever size the public television audience may be for a particular film, I've reached them. And starting in the 90s, my films began to be shown more theatrically. Still, they don't have a massive theatrical distribution, but they may be shown in 50 or 60 cities, which is nothing compared to an opening of 2,500 theaters. But that's not going to happen with my films. And by owning the rights, I get to keep whatever income the films produce. Occasionally a channel, a commercial channel or a cable channel will want to have a mini retrospective and they'll buy 4 or 5 films. So Karen, provides them with the copies and we get the income. And I also think that, in a certain sense, my films are going to have more value in 30 or 40 years than they do now. I mean, and they have a pretty decent value now because there'll be a historical aspect to showing them, and people will see what a high school or a hospital emergency ward or a police department was like when I made the film, which may be, the time lag may at that point be 180 or 100 years. And, I think it's that point when somebody is familiar with what a police department is like in, say, 2065, they'll be able to see what the police department in Kansas City was like in 1968 or 67. And they can make a more detailed or specific comparison. And to the extent that I think many of my films are funny now, but to the extent that they're viewed solely as comedies 100 years from now, that will be some measure of social change.
And I want to ask you more about your relationship to an audience. I hear you say that you take a lot of satisfaction just in making the films, delving into a world that is new to you, the all the art and craft that goes into editing that you've done yourself. But what does a film mean to you after it's finished, and for how people respond to it?
Well, obviously, it pleases me if people like the film, but I don't really have any relation to an audience. I rarely see a film with an audience, and I think it's impossible to keep an audience in mind when you're making a film. I think that's just a fantasy that some people believe in, because, when I made high school in 1968, I couldn't, you were barely born in 1968, and I couldn't anticipate, any idea I might have had would have been a fantasy about someone 57 years later responding to the film. So so the short answer to the question is I don't know how to think about an audience, so I don't. And I make the film to meet my own standards, and that's it.
You've described that a time-consuming part of filmmaking and the least interesting part of filmmaking is raising money to make films. And I wonder what you learned over the years about asking other people for money.
Well, I had a few individual investors in City Cut Follies, but since then I've never had any individual investors. I've always had the money from foundations, and PBS, beginning with PBL, which is an earlier version of PBS, in 1968. But all of my films have been supported in part by PBS. They put up 20, in each case, 20 to 30% of the budget. And then the Ford Foundation has also been very generous in its support of me, and they've supported almost all my films as well. And then there are a bunch of smaller foundations that have given me money. So the budget is cobbled together from PBS and the Ford Foundation, and plus a number of other foundations. Pershing Square Foundation has been very generous with me.
And so what has it meant for you to, walk in these places and explain what you're trying to do, and trying to anticipate what they're looking for?
In the beginning, I had to do that, but the last 45 years or so, I haven't, because in a sense, the places that I'm dealing with know me, and they seem to have confidence that I'm going to produce something that they'll be interested in. So although I write a proposal, it's really short, and it's totally hypothetical, because I don't know what I'm going to find. I sort of make lists of sequences or events that I think I might find, but I say quite clearly that I can't guarantee that I'm going to find them, because it depends on what occurs when I'm present with the police or in a high school or in a hospital emergency ward. I can talk about events that I think are characteristic, and that I'm likely to find. But so the proposal is usually on a page and a half, where I make a list of hypothetical events and describe the technique, and that's it. And also, I was very fortunate that Fred Friendly, who was the head of CBS News and then went on to really went to the Ford Foundation, and through Fred's interest and work, the Ford Foundation was really the principal sponsor of public television in the beginning. They gave an enormous grant to support it, and they supported it for years. Fred Friendly liked my movies, and he arranged for me to have a separate grant from two separate grants, each of which lasted 5 years, from the Ford Foundation to Channel 13, the public television station in New York, which in turn gave me the money, so that for 10 years, to get the money, this was from about 1971 to 1981, all I had to do to get the money for a film was call up the program director, Bob Kotlowitz, at Channel 13 and say, Bob, I want to make a film about a juvenile court. And he'd say, okay. And they'd send me half the money, and I got the other half the money when I delivered the film. And that was obviously a fantastic benefit to me. For 10 years, I didn't, and so I made 10 films in 10 years. And then afterwards, I put together this sort of coalition of PBS and continued support from the foundation and Pershing Square Foundation and a number of other small foundations, and that's how I've got the money. So I've been lucky. I haven't had to plead for the money, and I haven't taken individual investors since Titicut Follies.
You talk about this, the centrality of public television to your work. Public television isn't that much older. American public television isn't that much older than your career.
No, it parallels my career.
Yeah, and I mean, now we're living during an White House administration that circle of people will disparage public television, and other public media. It's hard to know what the future of public media will be. I mean, I wonder if you can talk about what meaning public television has had to you, besides the obvious self-serving one that it's funded your films.
Well, I mean, but that's the principal one. Although I listen to National Public Radio a lot, and I watch. I don't watch much television of any sort, but when I watch television, it's usually PBS. But the last 20 years or so, I've been living most of the time in France, so I haven't gotten PBS over there. Um, but I mean, PBS is obviously, and National Public Radio are obviously threatened now. But they've been threatened every year for a number of years, and they've survived, I think, because they have a lot of local support, in the sense that in communities where there are public television and NPR stations, they're both financially and publicly supported by people of all political persuasions in the community. And when Congress has made an effort to stop their funding, it's produced a lot of bipartisan support. And so far, although this year may be different, so far they've managed to survive. And I hope that will continue to be the case. I mean, not just for my own selfish reasons, but because I think they provide an important public service.
You talked about the last 20 years of your career where you've made a number of films in Paris and France. Can you just explain for my listeners, like, what your history with France and when that started?
Sure. I when I got out of the army, I spent almost 2 years in France. This is 56 to 58, and I liked it there. And I learned French, and I didn't go back for a long time because I couldn't afford it. I think I went back once in 1969. Then I went back in 1985. And when I went back in 1985, I met somebody there who asked me if I ever wanted to make a movie in France. And I said yes, because I was a fan of the Comédie Française. I went to it a lot when I was there in 56 to 58. And I thought it was a great theater company. So I said I wanted to make a movie about the Comédie Française. So 9 years later, in 1994, she called me and said, "I think I can get you permission to make the film now." So she said, "Come on over." So I came over and I met the man that was head of the Comédie, and he gave me permission. And so I made that, and I was in France for 6 months while making the Comédie, and then I got asked to direct a play at the Comédie. So I was there for another 4 or 5 months. And I liked living there. And then I thought about making, I'm a fan of ballet, and I'd already made one ballet film about the American Ballet Theater. But I thought the Paris Opera Company, dance company, was a great company. So I got permission to make that. And then I got permission to make The Crazy Horse. And I edited those films in France. So, and I discovered the food's good there. So it was fun to live there. And I like to go to the theater, and I like to go to ballet. And I made friends in the who were dancers and actors and directors, and so I had an interesting life. And then I got to direct another play at the Comédie, and then I got I directed Ole Bonjour, Happy Days, a Beckett play, and then I, with a friend of mine, put together a play about the life of Emily Dickinson, which it was done as a monologue, so I did that. So, I began to have a life there, so I had to stay there to do those French projects, but I liked living there, so I stayed.
I mean, obviously, France has a special relationship to cinema, and I wonder if you felt like your work was interpreted differently there or appreciated differently there.
I think, generally speaking, there's a lot more public sophistication about movies in France. Movies are, it's not that many people here take movies seriously, but it's a small country compared to America. I mean, 60 million people compared to 300 million people. And so that there's an acknowledgement and an interest which is public in a more immediate sense than in America. People have opinions about more. You meet people in a cafe and, they're moviegoers and they start talking about, and not just, the big commercial movies, but, the more serious filmmakers. And so it's a nice, atmosphere. And there are a lot of people who write very intelligently about movies.
This career-spanning retrospective that's happening, there's one film that you made that hasn't ever been able to reach a public audience, and that's your film The Garden, about Madison Square Garden. I wonder if you can just share what that film is from 2005, for starters.
It's a film about the operation of Madison Square Garden and the events that take place or took place there when I made the film, and I'm hoping that will be clear to be shown in the next year. There was some questions about rights and some questions about some of the sequences, but The Garden, I've now got clearance from The Garden to show the film, and there's some other rights that I have to clear, and then I think the film will probably be in distribution in the next year, 18 months.
So there you have it. We still have another Wiseman film to anticipate when The Garden finally comes out. I want to thank Fred Wiseman for speaking with me. His career retrospective is now playing at New York's Film at Lincoln Center. You can also find his films on Canopy. I invite you to read our Substack newsletter called Doc Voices, written by Bella Racklin. If you want to advertise to our 40,000 readers, send an email to listen@purenonfiction.net. Thanks to our team, series producer Hannah Nordenswan and web designer Cross Strategy. Our theme music is composed by Andre Williams, and our executive producer is Raphael Nehausen. I'm Tom Powers. Follow us on Instagram and visit our website at purenonfiction.net.